saturdayradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Okay, there we go. A very good morning to you. This is the Saturday Breakfast Show with me, your host, Darren Lester. This is a bit of a new look for us. We have historically, for the past few years, 3, 4, I forget how long it's been now, been streaming the show live via Podbean on a Saturday morning, but now we have made the leap over to YouTube and to X. So this is the first time that I've ever done this kind of streaming solo before. So I do hope that that you will bear with me if we have any technical glitches, if we have any difficulties, as we just did, where I forgot to put myself on the stage. So, I was having a bit of a chat with you, I was welcoming you, and you couldn't hear me, but hopefully you can now. In case you are new to Saturday Breakfast, in case you've never caught us in the past, my name is Darren Lester. I am a head of classics at an online school. So all of my teaching is done online, and I talk a lot about the benefits of online learning. I also am a languages teacher, an MFL teacher. So I've kind of got my hands in lots of pies when it comes to MFL and when it comes to humanities teaching. My particular interest is in evidence-based practice. And so Saturday mornings tend to be a lot of time spent looking through papers, me trying to make them as digestible as possible, and having a chat about them as we come through. All right, so Tim has texted in I need to get used to a new phrase, don't I? Tim has left a comment to say that he is hearing loud and clear. I am very glad of that, and thank you very much. Again, in case you are new to Saturday Breakfast, Tim is a very old friend of the show and has been here ever since the beginning. He was, in fact, my very first guest, and then he was my very second guest because we had a few technical difficulties on that show, and he has hung around ever since. So I'm hoping that means that the show is worth your time. How have you all been? I hope you've been well. I personally have been, it's been an interesting week. It's been a very interesting week because not only are we new here on the YouTubes, I've got myself a bit of a new setup. I'm quite proud of my new setup, I must say, because we have got 2 screens. I've moved to a dual screen system. And I've got to say, it has revolutionized my life. It really has. So I'm going to tell anybody who has either a lot of online teaching through like tutoring or revision sessions and support and stuff, or anybody who, like me, teaches online, if you're only working on one screen, I suggest you get yourself a second, because especially this week, we had Latin 1 yesterday. And so over the bank holiday weekend, I accrued a lot of marking as my students were sending past papers. And being able to have my past papers open on one screen to mark, and then my mark book open on another, and just able to transfer my my marks over cleanly without having to faff between windows, that was amazing. So yeah, definitely, if you are somebody who spends a lot of time online, definitely worth the investment. I am very sorry, Tim, with the very old. I can't believe that my phraseology is causing issues already, and we've only been on YouTube for about 5 minutes. but that seems about right. Tom has messaged, has left a comment. I need to find a good phrase. I always like when we text it in. So if anybody's got any good ideas for good phrases that I can incorporate for how we're now interacting, please let me know. To say that we need to send Tim a TTR mug. I think we do. I actually think we do. TTR mugs are great, I must say. Although I will also say, still waiting for mine. Thank you. But any merch, I think, is a good thing. I appreciate when people leave a message. I appreciate when people text in. And so if you want to join in the conversation today, you can absolutely do that. There are a couple of ways, as I always say, that you can engage with me and with the show. You can leave a message. This is very snazzy, this setup, because your messages appear on my screen, and then with a click of a button, I can make them appear on yours. So I don't even need to read them out anymore. This is why online streaming is the way to go for everything, for podcasting and for teaching, I swear. But yeah, drop me a message and we can engage that way. If you are listening live elsewhere, or if you are listening on playback, then you can get in touch with me via my Blue Sky account. I am at Mr. D Lester. That's MRDLESTER, because some things don't change. And we can engage that way, because as I always say, these are topics that we talk about are topics that I am very interested in, and I will always want to talk about. Now, I'm aware that I haven't actually introduced the topic yet. We used to do that during the titles, but as you will be able to see from the lovely title of the show down at the bottom of your screen, we are talking about interventions to reduce exam anxiety today. So we are looking specifically at ways that different schools have introduced ways to get their children together and tackle the issues that they may be feeling around sitting exams.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC covers the University of Sussex's successful appeal against a record £585,000 fine and court ruling that it had infringed on lawful freedom of speech. Last year, the Office for Students handed down the fine and claimed the university had breached its trans and non-binary inclusion policy. The investigation came after Professor of Philosophy Kathleen Stock left her job at the university following student protests about her views on gender and biological sex. The Office for Students regulator said it would take time to consider whether to appeal the new judgment and its findings, but the University of Sussex Vice-Chancellor said she was delighted at the outcome. Full details of the story can be found on the BBC News Family and Education website. Schools Week say that ministers are set to get softer on English and Maths GCSE resit entries, but tougher on results. The current condition of funding policy forces 16 to 19-year-olds without a grade 4 in English and Maths to continue studying these subjects. Colleges say this drives endless resits. Ministers say they accept that progress towards level 2 in the core subjects happens in a complex environment and is not always captured by blunt exam outcomes. The government is now proposing changes designed to make greater fair representation of student progress while reinforcing high standards, to sharpen accountability. The most immediately welcomed proposal is likely to be a softening of the penalty applied when students are not entered for English or Maths exams, previously criticised by many post-16 providers as incentivising premature resits. Further proposals are also included in the article, which can be found on the Schools Week website. The Guardian reports that half of England's schools are unfit due to leaks, mould and faulty toilets, according to a survey by the NAHT union. Other issues included in the survey are asbestos, ageing boilers and malfunctioning fire doors. Toilets, however, are reported as a main issue, with 73% saying they are in need of replacement or repair, but that schools lack the funds to do so. Next on the list at 41% were facilities for pupils with SEND, which some schools say are unfit or out of use. The findings come at a time when government is proposing reforms to the SEND system, which will require mainstream schools to expand provision for pupils with SEND. The poll had 326 participants, but the union says it still provides a vivid picture of the problems faced by head teachers. More details and comment from union leaders can be found online. Finally, the BBC says a university is to offer an innovative degree course under a 2-day-a-week study model, designed to attract students put off by irregular timetables or by cost. University College Birmingham will guarantee students on-campus learning on the same 2 consecutive days per week. The university says the courses, ranging from 1 to 3 years in length, are designed to appeal to students within a 1 to 2 hour commute. Courses will include criminology, finance and business, as well as many others, and include a 1-night overnight campus stay. Full details can be found on the BBC. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe. Can we just take a moment to appreciate how seamlessly Joe has incorporated images into the news? I think that's brilliant, and I think that that visual element really adds a lot to what Joe has to say every week. So thank you, Joe, and I'm really excited to sort of see how the news is gonna get better and better as we move forward. That news about a 2-day course, essentially, is really interesting to me because I know somebody when I went to uni. So, bearing in mind, I was in uni 2004 to 2007 was when I did my B.Ed. I know somebody who did an English degree at a university, not exactly close to where we live, but in a commutable distance. And she stayed in our town and commuted because her course only had lectures and seminars 1 day a week. So she essentially worked full time throughout her studies while commuting on the 1 day a week to go to her lectures, to go to her seminars. And she loved that because it meant that she was able to reduce her student loan right down. And like I said, work full time while she was studying. So I think, particularly in a time where universities are becoming out of reach for so many young people because of financial barriers, because these days the cost of 1 year is about what I paid for my first degree and my master's degree, I think, it's ridiculous, quite frankly. I understand that universities need to make money. I understand that there is a cost of living crisis issue, whatever we want to call it. I understand that there are lots of reasons why universities are now so expensive and why these big loans need to be taken. But if we're going to put education behind a paywall, maybe we do need to make sure that the students can earn the money to be able to pay for it. It does, however, beg the question of whether courses such as that will be the same price when everything is condensed into 2 days, which I suppose they should be, because you are essentially getting the same amount of contact hours, just condensed, just within a couple of days instead of over a week, or whether they will reduce the price because you are only there for a couple of days. I don't know. It will be interesting to see kind of what comes of this as the proposal moves forward. Anyway, we are here today to talk about exam anxiety. Anxiety is something that we talk about a lot here on Saturday Breakfast. I make no secret of the fact that I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder a few years ago. I've been on meds for it ever since, and I think it's very important that we have these conversations about stress, about anxiety, about depression, both within the teaching profession and for our young people. to kind of destigmatize it. Not that I have encountered any stigma so far, I must say. I've been very lucky in that in the 2 schools that I have worked in since I got my diagnosis, my senior leaders, my line managers have all been incredibly supportive of everything that has happened and the accommodations that we have put in place to compensate for that. So I've been very lucky, but I'm aware that that is luck, that is the fact that I have worked with and for some incredibly nice people, and that there is still some stigma out there for teachers, for young people, about anything to do with mental health. So I think it's really important that we have these conversations. I think it's important that we have these conversations specifically about teachers, because our mental health quite often gets ignored in the wider discussion, which focuses on our young people. But today we are going to focus on our young people because they are the biggest proportion of people having exam anxiety. Although I must say, in that kind of 2-hour slot yesterday between Latin 1 starting at 9 and getting my first email from a student at 11 to let me know what they thought of it, I stress cleaned so much. My house has never been cleaner. So I think that is a very positive thing. But it shows that it's not just the young people that have the exam anxiety. We as teachers go through it as well. However, we are focused on our young people today, and this is actually quite timely. Now, I planned this kind of suite of shows. I tend to plan about a quarter at a time if I can. So I planned these shows back at Christmas, when I could not have possibly known that the week where I wanted to talk about interventions to reduce exam anxiety, we would have a major news story hit about a school that was offering compulsory interventions in the form of revision sessions. I am not going to talk at length about this because, in fact, we have already done a show here on Teachers Talk Radio in response to that. I say we, I wasn't involved. It was JP, Tom, Tony, and Michael, and they did a really interesting show kind of dissecting the letter that was sent out that kind of went viral across social media, across news media, about this school that was making after school revision sessions and weekend revision sessions compulsory. There was then an interesting discussion in the comments, especially on LinkedIn. I did get involved in that discussion where I made my view very clear that in terms of revision sessions themselves, I don't have an issue with them. As long as the teacher who is running the session wants to run them, I think they should be allowed to. I run revision sessions for my pupils. I like running revision sessions. In my previous school, there were 2 of us who were doing the GCSE French class at the time that I left, and we came to a bit of an agreement where I ran the revision sessions for both classes, and there were other bits of admin that my partner teacher kind of took over, and we did it that way because I liked doing the revision sessions, and I thought that they were important. There is obviously a bigger discussion to be had about this concept of revision sessions being compulsory and teachers not being able to opt in and opt out. But yeah, I personally like them. Hopefully, if I have done this correctly, that QR code that has appeared up on the top of your screen should take you directly to the stream of that show from Monday evening. So if you are interested in hearing what people have to say, how that conversation on Teachers Talk Radio went, then just please scan that QR code. It will take you over to a streaming platform where you will be able to stream that show. But please don't do that until you've finished listening here. Please don't abandon me for somebody else. But I think it is, this concept of interventions, where do interventions go too far? How much is too much? Is a very important discussion for us to have. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind, and I do hate this phrase, so I can't believe that I'm saying it, but we do have to keep in mind that we are doing things for the children. We are doing things for our young people. And that cuts both ways, I suppose. Because on the one hand, and the way that I'm kind of positioning the show today, I'm sort of saying that there could be necessary interventions for our young people in order to help them deal with the stress of exams, in order to help them learn concepts that maybe up until this point that we haven't taught them. That is really, really helpful. Imposing those things on our young people, saying that you have to come to these revision sessions, even if we are revising something that you are completely confident with, and your time would be better spent revising something that you are less sure about, that, in my opinion, is where we go too far. And actually, JBL has said over on X, teaching students how to study is the best way to reduce stress and find success. And I think that there is a lot of truth in that. And that is kind of the crux of what I was saying on Monday, is that it's all very well and good offering revision sessions. And like I said, I like them. I will take any excuse to rabbit on about language. That's that itself is not an issue. But by making them compulsory, we are kind of taking away the onus on the student to learn how to revise, to learn how to manage their time. And what we are doing is potentially creating students who don't know how to do that and who will flounder when they get to a situation where they have to learn something and they're on their own. Perhaps they go to a sixth form college that is not as spoon feedy as school might have been for them. Perhaps they go to university where they are one of 500, 1,000 in their cohort, and their lecturers won't give them the exact answers to the quizzes that are coming up. Maybe they've got to do some CPD, some professional development for whatever career they go into, and their boss isn't going to hold their hand while they take their course. Study skills is something that is very important, and that I know a lot of schools do have on their curricula, usually part of the PSHE offering. But I think we could be doing more to help our young people prepare for the exams that they're taking. Of course, the reason that we tend not to is because we've got so much content to cover. And so it is all about striking that balance of what can we actually do, what can we fit in a school day. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We are here to talk specifically about a pilot study that happened in the Northeast in order to reduce exam anxiety, or at least with the intention of reducing exam anxiety. The paper that I've pulled this from is called Examination Anxiety, a School-Based Intervention. Nice and straightforward. I love a straightforward title. This was published in the Pastoral Care in Education journal in 2022. So a relatively old piece of research, if we are thinking in terms of how many years have passed since 2022, but a relatively new piece of research when we think, as I've talked about before, about how long that publication process takes. The authors of this paper are David Soares, who at the time was working with the University of Manchester's School of Environment, Education and Development, and Kevin Woods, who was also over at Manchester. Soares is a trainee educational psychologist who had 18 years experience working as a secondary school teacher. And I think that that's worth flagging, because one of the big conversations that we have in teaching and in using educational research is whether or not the researchers are or ever have been in the classroom. And I think, that's why when we have researchers who are still teachers, or when we have researchers who have been teachers, it is really important to kind of make us aware of that so that we know that research is coming from within our profession. And that dual perspective that he has really comes across in this paper, in my opinion. I really feel like you can see the teacher and the researcher parts of him engaging with each other to find out exactly what was best for these young people. They open the paper by painting a picture of the mental health context in schools, and frankly, it's not a comfortable one. Now, again, we're going to caveat this a little bit by reminding ourselves that it came out in 2022, which means the research itself was probably conducted over 2020, 2021, and we know there were specific things happening then. So we have to keep that in mind as we look at the results of this, because that was a very particular, very peculiar time. But at the same time, we can't ignore the results of any research just because it comes from that time. Otherwise, we've got no research to draw on, no recent research to draw on for at least the next 5 years. So again, we're kind of keeping two things in mind here. We are acknowledging the fact that there were very specific circumstances affecting the children who were a part of this pilot study. But we are also understanding that that doesn't necessarily mean that the results of this are not valid. If they weren't valid, I wouldn't be sitting here talking about it, because that would be a waste of all of our time. But like I said, that is not a comfortable picture that they are painting, because the estimate at the moment is that 100,000 students in England alone, so this isn't even taking into account all of Great Britain, but in England alone, approximately 100,000 students may be experiencing clinically significant levels of test anxiety in any given year that they sit their GCSEs. So again, for some framing, for some couching, we are thinking specifically now about GCSEs, but this could be applicable to our A-level students moving upwards. It could be applicable to our SAT students moving down into year 9, into year 6, into year 2. Just remembering when we test our pupils at various stages throughout their school career. And again, that's something that we really need to consider, the impact of this stress on our young people. In my show last week, we looked at some research that said that just the words, "this will count towards your grade," or just the words, "this is a test," can immediately impact performance because of how it impacts the short-term memory and the cognitive loading. And so we know that even our 6 and 7-year-olds who might be sitting those SATs in year 2 are aware of the pressure that they're under, or at least their body is aware of the pressure that they're under when they sit these tests. That has enough of an impact to make sure that they don't do as well as they do in non-examined, non-test conditions. And if we take that to be true, it stands to reason that they are feeling this stress as well. So it might be that we need to look at these interventions across year groups, not just with our year 11 pupils. I feel like we are kind of missing the bigger picture here, in that we are firefighting exam stress rather than considering whether exams are actually the best way to create a terminus of education. But again, that's not what we're really here to talk about today, because that is the situation that we're in. We're not going to change that over the next hour. So we are going to look at these firefighting methods. But at the same time, again, if we go back to my show about Samuel Pepys writing about the state of education in his diary in the 1600s and complaining about the same sorts of things that teachers today are complaining about, if we don't have these conversations, if we don't open up these avenues, nothing is actually ever going to change. So that number, that 100,000, means that in every classroom there are approximately 3 children who have some kind of diagnosable mental health condition. Between the years 2009 and 2015, hospital admissions for self-harm in children aged between 0 to 17 rose by over 50%. NSPCC data from 2018 show that the number of schools seeking NHS child and adolescent mental health services, the CAMS, had risen by more than a third in the preceding 4 years, which makes 183 referrals every school day by 2017-2018, so pre-pandemic. And CAMS is amazing. What CAMS tries to do is remarkable, given their limited resources, given the lack of what is available to them. But at the same time, because of these limited resources, because they are underfunded, waiting times are long, lead times are too long. There had been a well-documented paper trail of children not being able to get the support that they need. So you've got a student who is suffering from quite severe stress, anxiety. Teachers and parents turn to the appropriate bodies for help. The child is put on a waiting list. Meanwhile, while they're on the waiting list, their exams come and their exams go, and that support doesn't arrive in time. And again, to be clear, this is not me criticizing CAMS, because I know how underfunded they are. I also know how amazing their support is. And so I'm definitely not criticizing them. What I do want to criticize is a system that has systematically underfunded mental health provision for children, mental health provision for any young people, really, while it simultaneously ratchets up the pressure of formal assessment. Because those two things generally are happening at the same time, at the same rate. And this paper that we're looking at today is very clear about that. It situates exam anxiety as a problem not of individual students necessarily, but of the situation they are in, that you would expect of any of our young people who are put into this kind of environment, who are put through this kind of pressure. I think it's really important for us to just remind ourselves of what was happening in 2017 in terms of exams, because that also contextualizes a lot of what we're talking about today. Before 2017, GCSEs and A-levels included modular assessment. So we had coursework, we had controlled assessment, we had modules with exams that were spread over time. The 2017 reforms moved more decisively towards linear assessment, so a terminal exam at the end of your course that covered all the content in 1, 2, 3 big sittings. Even in subjects where NEAs, non-examinable or non-examined assessments, remained, such as in MFL, those still tended to happen towards the end of year 13. So in MFL, for example, our A-level speaking exam, which is our NEA, is happening now. And so even though in theory, on paper, it's a non-examined assessment, and it's akin to the coursework, the controlled assessment of pre-2017, it's still happening at a time when our children, our young people, are feeling that exam pressure. It's still coming at the end of their course. What this means in practice then is that for many subjects, everything that your students have learned over 2 years or longer, because let's be honest, our GCSEs don't just assess what is learned over those 2 years. Very few students I know start to learn French in year 10, having done no French before, and then take a GCSE at the end of year 11. I do think that it's possible to do that in 2 years. Some of my Latin students do it. They come to me with no Latin whatsoever at the beginning of their course, and they take a GCSE at the end of the 2 years. It's an intense time, but they do it. But generally, that's kind of not what happens. It's the assessment of everything that they have learnt in that subject since the beginning of their schooling, when they are 4 years old, taken over 2 or 3 papers. The paper that we are referring to, so Examination Anxiety, a School-Based Intervention, terms this performance-driven culture. And I think that's right, because it's not just that these exams are high stakes for our individual students. The stakes are felt by the whole institution. Teachers, SLT, head teachers know full well that exam results appear in published data. School leaders know that their position in league tables depends partly on exam outcomes. The pressure then is institutional, it's systemic, it's not just individual. And the students absorb that. They feel the weight of that institution. The children know about league tables. Parents talk about league tables. And so even though their immediate focus might be on, oh, I need to get certain GCSEs to take the A levels I want to do. I need to get certain GCSEs to get into the university that I ultimately want to go to. That's not the only pressure that is existing around them. It's not the only pressure that they are aware of, and it's not the only pressure that they are absorbing. So now that we've thought about that, and we've thought about the pressures that these young people are under, let's talk about what we mean when we say test anxiety. I keep saying text instead of test, because we are going to be good academics and we are going to define our terms. Test anxiety is a very specific type of anxiety that is triggered by situations in which someone is being evaluated, judged, or examined. It does what it says on the tin. It is not feeling nervous before a test. That's natural. That's your body's response to any kind of perceived stressor. And as I always tell my students, and I think most of us do, that's a good thing, because you're going to use those feelings, you're going to use that adrenaline that your body is creating to help get you through the hour of sustained writing that you need to do in English literature. So it's not just about feeling a little bit nervous before our exam. And it's important that we make that distinction for both ourselves and for our young people, so that we don't end up inadvertently telling somebody that they're suffering from test anxiety when in fact they're just a little bit scared of the test. And so that our students know that just because they are a little bit scared of their exams does not mean that they have exam anxiety. It's really important to understand that difference. Exam anxiety itself is clinically recognized as a psychological pattern, and it has 2 very distinct dimensions. The researchers of this paper draw on Spielberger's 1983 framework, which divides test anxiety into cognitive dimension and affective dimension. Okay, so the cognitive dimension is worry. It's the self-preservation, let's run away from this exam thinking about failure. It's the catastrophizing, what's going to happen if you don't perform well. It's the replaying of the imagined disasters, being able to focus on the actual test that you are taking because you are too worried about failing it. It's the little voice in their head, in the pit of their stomach, wherever it might be, that says to them, you're going to fail, and everyone's going to know that you're going to fail, and your future is ruined. So it's a very extreme version of that worry. Because again, I think everybody has that feeling of, well, what if I don't pass? What is my plan B? When are the retakes? Will I be able to retake? Will my sixth form college still accept me if I offer to do the retakes? You know, that's all part of that worry. The anxiety has an extreme version of that. The affective dimension is called emotionality. That's the physiological and emotional response to the situation of being tested. So it's your racing heart, it's your sweaty palms, it's your nausea, it's your sense of dread. It's the bodily component. And quite often the bodily component exacerbates the emotional component, because you can be very aware of what your body is doing. You can be very aware of how your body is feeling and what you think that's going to mean. Because if, let's say, you have got a pit in your stomach getting ready to go into the exam, suddenly your mind is going, well, what if I need to go to toilet? Because I know when I go to toilet, the clock doesn't stop. So maybe I'm missing 5 minutes of my exam. Can I afford to miss 5 minutes of my exam? And the little voice inside your head starts talking again, and it compounds. And so this is essentially the body and the brain working together to add more pressure. And that pressure comes from within. So this is not talking about parental pressure. This is not talking about teacher pressure. This is talking about something within these students that is creating this anxiety inside, with, and for themselves. Research consistently finds that it is the cognitive component, so it's that worry, that does the most damage to performance. Again, this is something that we talked about at length in the show last week. So if you missed that, please do go back through the archives and find that show, because it is a really interesting paper that looks at what happens when you tell children they're being tested versus what happens when you don't. The physical symptoms, of course, are unpleasant, but it is the thought patterns, like we've just said, that most directly undermine that exam performance, because they are the things that directly compete with the cognitive resources that you need to think about your answers in the exam. If you are worrying about the fact that maybe you will need to nip to the loo in 5 minutes, and so you might not have enough time for your translation, you're not going to be focused on which word in line 3 is a pronoun. To use a very common classics question. And so interventions that only target the physical symptoms. So when we focus on teaching breathing exercises, when we focus on teaching relaxation techniques, those things are good. I'm not disparaging them at all, but they will reduce stress without necessarily improving performance. Effective interventions need to address those cognitive patterns. And that's what this system that these researchers, a system that they call BEAT, beating exam anxiety together, came up with. And that is what they attempted to do.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
So BEAT was developed by practicing educational psychologists down in Kent, in response to a massive increase in referrals from schools around test anxiety. So it was developed from practice. It came out of addressing a need, not from a place of theory. Now, again, I see no issue with coming from a place of theory. A lot of what I do comes from a place of theory. But, this is important because it addresses something that is an actual need and that we can slot easily into a school context. The idea behind it was that there were 6 sessions, each one lasting approximately 50 minutes. And these sessions were delivered once a week over 6 weeks. That's a big commitment. That's a school period that these children are losing every single week, or that you've got to try and find somewhere in the timetable for them to be, removed or something so that they can go through it. If it's offered as an extra on top of the timetable, then that's 50 minutes every week that they don't have for homework, for after school activities, for just lounging on the sofa and recovering. So you really need to think about the time cost of this versus any benefit that may come out of it. The individual components of these sessions draw on approaches from cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is interesting because as a teacher, as a linguist, as a classicist, I am not at all trained to deliver CBT. And I don't think that any of us, unless we are psychologists who have gone into teaching, should be delivering CBT techniques. Got to be really careful how you say that. Without going through the appropriate training, because we know that anything that kind of changes how the brain functions, if you don't know what you're doing, can be very dangerous. But it also draws on psychoeducational learning about stress, and it draws on mindfulness techniques. I think psychoeducational learning and mindfulness, those are things that I think we can all practice, that we can all show our students how to practice. It is the cognitive behavioral therapy element that gives me a slight pause and makes me wonder whether this is something that is necessarily appropriate to be running in schools unless you have got trained psychologists, as these researchers were, being the ones to run the interventions. The question in the study was whether or not packaging these things together in a school context, which was delivered collaboratively by an EdPsych and a SENCO, would work specifically to help reduce exam anxiety. And in order to do that, they delivered these 6 sessions that we are going to work through. So session 1 was making them aware of what stress and anxiety felt like in the body. So they thought about things like when your extremities tingle. They thought about things like when your calves start to burn because your muscles are getting ready to run. They were thinking about things like indecisiveness, the freeze response. And all of these things, I think, are common enough in popular culture that anybody could talk about them. I think we all know about fight, flight, fawn, and freeze. We all know how to do a body scan, is what it was called when I went through CBT. Just kind of checking in with various parts of your body, understanding how you're feeling, and thinking about why you might be feeling that way. But what that does is it gives the students a framework to understand what is happening to them physiologically and psychologically. It helps them to name the thing, to name the feeling, and so demystify it. It takes that pit of the stomach feeling and goes, okay, this isn't actually my body preparing for me to need to go to the toilet halfway through this exam. This is a response to my anxiety. This is how my body is manifesting my anxiety right now. Session 2 was the CBT foundation of the cognitive triangle. So it taught the children about the links between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And the idea there is that how you perceive something shapes how you feel about it, shapes what you do about it. They weren't learning coping techniques yet, which I think is really interesting because they are now 100 minutes into this intervention and they haven't learned how to cope with anything. They've just learned how to identify things. But giving something a name takes away the fear of it. It demystifies it. And so it probably is 100 minutes worth spent, well spent. Session 3 is when they learn how to challenge their unhelpful thought patterns and apply strategies to break them. This is an active CBT technique. So this is where the EdPsych, I hope, would lead the session. Students begin identifying their particular pattern of catastrophic thinking or unhelpful thinking. So those mental scripts that run as they are approaching the exam: I'm going to fail, There is no retake. I'm not going to get into Oxbridge. You know, my whole life is over before I've even picked up a pen and written my name. And it helps them to interrupt it. It teaches them physical or psychological things that they can do to interrupt and break that thought pattern so that they can bring themselves back into the exam room, so that they can free up that cognitive load to focus on the exam that is in front of them. Session 4 then is when they get practical skills to deal with the physical symptoms of stress, the breathing techniques, the mindfulness techniques, the body-based tools, all of that stuff that we would probably, if we were just running a coping with exam stress session without thinking about the specifics of exam test anxiety, we would probably deliver. And again, we would probably feel comfortable delivering these things because there are lots of resources out there that we as teachers can use to educate ourselves about breathing techniques, about mindfulness techniques. Mindfulness, I've noticed, particularly as an extracurricular activity, has really popped up lately over the past couple of years. I don't think I visited a primary school certainly in the last 2 or 3 years that doesn't at some point in the year offer mindfulness as an extracurricular activity. So I know that lots of teachers feel comfortable delivering and teaching these techniques. Session 5 dealt with the practicalities of exam preparation. So with the study skills, with revision strategies, with tackling procrastination, with tackling perfectionism. We're actually doing a whole show next week on perfectionism. So again, 9 o'clock right here on YouTube, on X, next Saturday morning. Please do tune in for that one if you are interested in that kind of psychology of perfectionism and what we can do to help our students who feel that they are perfectionists. Because procrastination and perfectionism are actually two symptoms that are very commonly linked to test anxiety. Students who are anxious about exams either avoid revision because it confronts the feared outcome. They realize what they don't know when they start revising, or they get trapped in a perfectionist cycle where they feel that nothing that they can do is ever good enough. Session 6 then is a review and consolidation. So it pulls everything together. It teaches them further practice of the skills, and it prepares them to take what they have learned independently out into the world so that when the exam time comes, they can use those techniques, calm themselves down, and hopefully reduce their feelings of anxiety. This was specifically an exploratory study, not a randomized control trial. There wasn't a comparison group. There was no kind of second group of anxious students who didn't go through the program and then, have measurements taken. The researchers were only looking at the beat group. What happened was this beat group kind of compared their own feelings before and after tests, and so they became their own control group. They were like, how was I feeling before I underwent the BEAT program about these exams that are coming up, and how am I feeling about them afterwards now that I've been through the program? You then make up your own mind as to whether you think these results are generalizable, whether you think these results are valid, to use a not great term, but it's good enough for now for our purposes, in terms of an intervention. Because I know that a lot of people will say, okay, well, that's a big downside to this paper. We don't actually know whether it made a difference. We've just got these children self-reporting on how they felt. The participants themselves were 14 students from 2 different schools, both single-sex girls' schools with a mixed sixth form up in the northwest of England. That's really interesting in light of what we discussed last week, where we learnt that boys and girls are equally likely to suffer from test anxiety. They just express it in different ways. So I think for the purposes of this trial, it's interesting because the girls based on that research, the girls are more likely to be able to and to be willing to express how they're feeling about their anxiety before and after, which gives the researchers something to work with. I think if this test were going to be repeated with boys, there would need to be some tweaking in terms of how the measurements were taken, just because of what we know about how boys perceive and verbalize the stress and anxiety that they are feeling, in very general terms, of course. They were mixed across different age groups. So we had 7-year 10 students. So for anybody who's not teaching in an English context, they are aged 14 to 15. And they came from the first school. And then there were 7-year 12 students, so aged 16, 17, who came from the second school. Those students were identified by the SENCO and the pastoral team as potentially benefiting from support for test anxiety. It's important to note that students who were judged to have high levels of distress or emotional vulnerability were deliberately excluded from this, because the program wasn't designed to be a clinical intervention for students who were actively in the midst of a mental health crisis. And the researchers were very cautious in making sure that they didn't overstretch their scope. So this isn't designed to be any kind of immediate intervention for students who require more specialized, more formalized mental health support. The quantitative measurement that they took is what's called the RTA, the Revised Test Anxiety Scale, which is a well-validated 20-item questionnaire. The students would rate how often they experienced various symptoms during exam periods on a 4-point scale from I never feel this way to I always feel this way. That has decent internal reliability. The students completed it before the program, and then they completed it after the program. And that gave you the before and after numbers for each student. They then took some qualitative data by taking focus groups with the students after the programs and semi-structured interviews with the SENCOs from each school. These were recorded, they were transcribed, they were thematically analyzed, and so the researchers were able to look for and identify patterns across the participants' accounts of their own experience. So they looked at what worked, what didn't work, and what they could change in future. We'll start with the quantitative results because numbers are the thing that are easiest to quantify. And I say that as a qualitative researcher. 13 out of the 14 participants reported a reduction in their test anxiety scores on the RTA following the intervention. So that is 92.86% of that tested population, approximately. I'm a linguist, I'm not a maths person. This is why I'm a qualitative researcher. So if any mathematicians out there would like to correct me, please feel free to do so. But that was what I made it. The outlier, the one student who did not show a reduction in their test anxiety scores on the RTA, showed no change. So nobody was made worse. Nobody's symptoms were exacerbated, at least, by this study. We do have to be careful how we interpret this. The researchers in the paper are very careful about how they interpret this, because this is a pre-test, post-test design with 14 participants and no control group. So we can't conclude from this that the intervention definitely caused that reduction in anxiety scores, because we don't know what would have happened had they not gone through the intervention. It may be if they had had 6 weeks of school experience without the program and they had had regular revision sessions with their teachers, they may have reported the same things because they'd felt more confident in the material on which they were being tested. We don't know for sure. Maybe exam anxiety naturally reduces as the exams approach and as students feel more prepared for them. Maybe the act of being selected to be in the focus group, the test group, acted as a kind of placebo. Maybe it was the social element of the group. Maybe realizing that they weren't the only people feeling that way helps to reduce that anxiety. That these are not things that the researchers have investigated, and so it is important for us to keep in mind, as they do, that those are all perfectly plausible outcomes. They're all perfectly believable reasons for these numbers to go down. But this is why the qualitative data are really important. Actually talking to the students, talking to the Senko, finding out how they felt about what they went through. The thematic analysis identified two major themes in response to the question of whether or not the BEAT program was effective and why. The first theme that they identified was group identity, and the second was in skills transmission. And we're going to talk just very briefly about both of them. Group identity seems to be the most powerful theme across both schools, so from the year 10 students and the year 12 students. Both students and staff talked repeatedly about what it meant to be in a small group of people who were all experiencing the same thing. They all reported that that reduction in isolation, the realization, as I've just said, that finding out that you're not the only one feeling this way really helped them. It helped them to normalize that anxiety, to see that it was something that other people went through, to rationalize it as, oh, okay, this is something that my body does. This is something that I go through. This is something that lots of people go through. And we have things that we can use to deal with it. Student in school 1, so a 14-year-old, said, I think it's better being in a group because you get to see how other people cope with their anxiety, and you get to see how many other people actually have anxiety, so you don't feel as weird having it. Knowing that there's other people who have anxiety as well, it's quite nice. Not nice, but it's nice to know. And I think the way that that student reported that, even with her struggle to verbalize exactly what it was she was feeling, shows something really important. It shows us that relief of not being alone in an experience that to them had felt shameful or abnormal. Again, from educational psychology, we know that amongst teenagers, there is a psychological drive to fit in. It's what drives a lot of their behavior, is this need to fit in, this need to create a group, this need to find a tribe. And so it kind of stands to reason, at least to me, that finding a tribe within the group of test takers would help to reduce that anxiety, because it helps to reduce that feeling of outsiderness that they specifically struggle with. From school 2, we had a report. We don't usually get anything like this. You can talk to somebody, but not like with other people to understand what they go through. I like the idea of working in a group because any techniques that other people might find useful, you may try, and you may find, oh yeah, it works for me too. So again, that group wasn't just a delivery mechanism. It wasn't just a case of it's more efficient for us to stand in a group and have one person deliver it to 15, 20 people all at the same time. It's part of that therapeutic logic. The students were observing each other. They were borrowing strategies from each other. They were discovering techniques that they might have dismissed if nobody had actually worked with them to teach it to them. That peer-to-peer dimension of the group has a value that one-to-one intervention with a professional doesn't seem to replicate. From a staff perspective, the Senko in school 2 put it beautifully when she said, I assumed it was a she. I shouldn't have done that. I apologize. When they said, I enjoyed the fact that it was a small group and I got to know the students as individuals. It's given me a better relationship with that group of girls now. So there's a pastoral dividend here too. The relationships that are built during those small supportive group interventions last beyond those sessions. The staff come away knowing those students better, and the students come away knowing that they have a specific member of staff who sees them and who understands them.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
This
outstanding and world-class vision and world-class.
I'm just clicking all the buttons. I'm getting too excited at having so many buttons to press. That second major theme was in skills transmission. That was the theme that was most directly about what the program taught the students to do. And the students reported that they were feeling empowered to use psychology for change. And I think that phrase is really interesting because it suggests that what the students took away was not just a set of techniques, but a sense of agency. They had this feeling that tools were available to them. Anxiety was not something that happened to them and they had to put up with, but it was something they could act on. It was something that they could change. The Senko in School 1 captured this when they said, I feel that the material, the book, and just by speaking to you, I feel well equipped to run this study. And if we can help students recognize these things in themselves and give them the tools, then it's a good thing. And there was genuine enthusiasm coming from the Senko. In the transcript, there were lots of ellipses, so there were lots of pauses where the Senko was excited, with kind of gathering their thoughts. And I think it's really important then that the Senko feels equipped to deliver these sessions. It's not just that the students are feeling equipped to take everything away, because like I said, with all the goodwill in the world, it's difficult for those of us who are not trained in educational psychology, who are not trained in these behavioral techniques, to deliver them fully and securely. And so I'm really happy that this Senko felt that they could. The research isn't all positive, though. The students' staff were also asked about the barriers and the facilitators to the implementation of the program. And I think what emerged is really useful for any of us who are thinking about instituting some kind of anxiety intervention in our own schools. Timing was a significant issue. I don't think any of us are surprised about that. School 1 ran this program at lunchtime, and School 2 ran the program after school. Neither of these times were ideal. At lunchtime, students could hear their friends outside. They were distracted by it. The social cost of being inside in a group during what is supposed to be free time was felt. And then there was the question of who knew that you were in the intervention group. Did they know why you were in the intervention group? Is this telling more about you than you want other people to know? Students who are in a lunchtime group are very visible in a way that students who are pulled out of lessons aren't necessarily. And lunchtime is the time when your peer group most notices your absence and starts to ask questions. After school, there was a huge dropout concern. So remember, this was for the year 12s. So they are more likely to have other things, building up their UCAS personal statements after school. They might be doing D of E, they might have an after school job, they might be doing some volunteering, they might be taking on extra courses. One student said, you wouldn't have as many people going if it was after school. Voluntary after school attendance is harder to sustain, and for students who are already stretched by work and revision and extracurriculars, another hour at the end of the day is a lot to ask. During lessons, so if you take them out as an in-lesson intervention, that creates catch-up anxiety. Students across the board who are pulled out of lessons to attend a support group worry about what they're missing, and then again worry about being asked by their peers where they were. One student said, if you miss lessons, then you have to catch up on work, which may add anxiety. So there are two ways of looking at it. You either don't tell your friends, but you still don't want to be behind in lessons. So essentially, there is no perfect slot. It's like anything in school. There is never an ideal time to do this. Students are clear, though, that regardless of when the intervention takes place in terms of the school day, they want it as early as possible in the academic year, at the start of year 10, at the start of year 12, not 6 weeks before the exams start. One Senko said, let's start as soon as the academic year starts to give them a big lead time in. Let them practice because some of these things need to be practiced. This is not a case of we're teachers, we know this. You stand up in front of the class and you say something once and they've learnt it. Because that's not how education works. They need time to practice things like the body scan technique, like mindfulness breathing, all of the CBT techniques that they learn. They need opportunities to do that. And so if you do it in the first 6 weeks of the year, any time that they might have an in-class assessment, any time that they might have a mock exam, any time that they might have their grade 5 music theory or whatever it might be, they can take the opportunity to practice these techniques, and they can do it ahead of lower stakes testing, not the music theory one, obviously, but in-class assessments, unit tests, whatever it might be, and perfect the ones that work for them ahead of the, in inverted commas, real exams at the end of the following academic year. One of the program's features was weekly missions. They were tasks to complete between sessions to reinforce and practice the skills. I love the fact that it was termed weekly missions because, let's be honest, it's homework. You're being taken into an intervention and then given homework to do. The completion rate on these weekly missions was incredibly low. Students said they simply couldn't fit it in. And they very fairly prioritized homework for their assessed subjects, their extracurriculars, all of that other stuff, over the homework that they were given for the intervention group. The researchers adapted to this when they realized that the homework wasn't going to be done, and they started to incorporate these things into the session, and that had a much better sustainment rate. I think that that's a sensible pivot. And by tracking the fidelity monitoring protocol, we know that future researchers can build this adaptation into their program from the start instead of making it a pivot. So if you are planning on running some kind of anxiety intervention in school, don't give them homework because they won't do it. And they may very, very well get stressed about not doing it. The relaxation and mindfulness techniques also required adaptation. Some students weren't comfortable practicing them in a group setting. Again, when you are asking anybody to think very carefully, specifically about their physical feelings, how their body is feeling at any given time, that can be very uncomfortable for some people. So it may be that you need to teach the technique. You need to allow those who are comfortable practicing it while the others are around practice. Maybe give those who are not comfortable something to do, maybe a worksheet so that they could read over the technique, and then let them practice it in their own time, in their own space when they are ready. Because ultimately, this is an intervention designed to help them. And so it's one of those things where they will take the responsibility to do it. We trust them. We should trust them to take the responsibility to do it if they feel it's going to be of benefit to them. We've talked about the lack of male participants in this study. I've suggested reasons why that might have been, but it is, of course, especially for those of us who work in mixed gender settings, or if you work in an all boys school, it's going to be something very important to think about whether your boys are going to be as likely to report what they are feeling in the same way that the girls are. According to the research that we looked at last week, no. And so people who are interested in this might need to come up, if you're going to track the changes, if you're going to do this as a little piece of action research to see whether it's worth implementing in future, you might want to think about how you are asking the boys to respond to questions about how they're feeling, to make sure that you get the correct data, the actual feelings, rather than just what they think you want to hear or how they are perceiving their own feelings. I think with boys, there's an interesting other issue with something like this, which is that there could be the perception that it's a group for people who can't cope with exams. And I don't think anybody wants to be able to be seen as somebody who can't cope. But I do think, particularly with the culture of boys, that's a very potentially socially damaging thing to have thought about you. So again, how we pitch it, how we bring them in, how we talk about anxiety might really have to change if we bring boys in as part of our focus group. So, to finish off, what does this mean for us as teachers, as those of us who are on the ground? I'm going to attempt, I think, to sum up the whole show, the last, 80 minutes, in 7 points. I like 7. 7's a good number. Number 1, test anxiety is not the same as general nervousness, and it's not rare. The estimate of 1 in 6 year 10 and 11 students experiencing high levels of test anxiety means that there are students in your form group, in your tutor group, in your year 11, year 10 classes who are significantly affected. There are also students who are a bit nervous about the exams. There are students who are worried about the exams. Those students are not feeling the same thing. Both are equally valid feelings, both are equally important feelings, but they need to be tackled in different ways. Number 2, a structured group intervention program works much better than ad hoc support. The data from this study, as limited as they are, suggests that a program that combines psychoeducational, CBT, and mindfulness techniques delivered in a small group format over 6 weeks can meaningfully reduce test anxiety for the majority of participants. General pastoral encouragement, general study tips are not equivalent. We've had a few messages come in from JBL. I know, JBL, that you've had to go. If you listen to this on catch up, I want you to know that I have read through your messages and you have made some really interesting points. And I think that it is true to say that lots of students do feel unprepared to sit exams. I think it is fair to say that lots of students don't know how to revise, and that we as teachers still have a lot to do in terms of delivering study skills, delivering hints and tips, things that go beyond, in question 1 in my paper, you will be asked this type of question. In question 2 in my paper, you will be asked this type of question, which tends to be my default, certainly. If students ask me for exam tips, I will quite often do that, and I will take it just to whichever paper they happen to be studying for me, whichever language they happen to be studying. And we will go through question by question. We will talk about question type and how to tackle it, which is great for me and for my subject and for their performance in my subject. It doesn't help them overall. And to be honest, it doesn't even help them overall in my subject, because if I've done that for Latin 1, which was yesterday, I'm going to have to do it again to teach them the different types of questions that will come up in prose literature in a couple of weeks. Whereas if we have a very sustained study skills program that teaches them different techniques to revise, and it teaches them to try out different techniques to revise with, find the ones that work for them and implement them. If it's a study skills suite of lessons that teaches them how to take responsibility for their own revision, that's going to be certainly much more effective than how I've been tackling it this year. However, that's not going to reduce the anxiety. It will reduce the worry. It might reduce the nervousness. It might reduce those feelings of, I don't know how to approach this exam, but it's not going to reduce the anxiety, that the mental health issue, let's be honest with what it is at its core, that is affecting these young people. And I think, again, we can have both, but it's important, just as that distinction between anxiety and worry is important, it is important for us to remember that they're not the same thing. Number 3 is remembering that this group format is part of the medicine. It's not the delivery vehicle. The normalization of anxiety that happens when students are in a room with others who share the experience, that it's not nice, but it's quite nice to know moment, that can't be replicated in a one-to-one conversation. If you're going to run something like this, then do it as a group. But think carefully about the dynamics of that group, because we know that you can't just throw 12 teenagers together and expect them to form a cohesive group, even if they've all got something in common. So you might have to think very carefully about the interpersonal group dynamics of who you're putting together, to make sure that no conflict arises, to make sure that they are comfortable being relatively vulnerable with each other. Number 4, co-delivery is a sustainability strategy. An EdPsych who delivers a program and then leaves has achieved something, but an EdPsych who trains a Senko to deliver the program independently has built something. An EdPsych who trains a Senko has created something that is sustainable. So it's really important for the Senko to work with the EdPsych. I do think it's important that EdPsychs are the one who initially come in to deliver things like this. And I understand that that creates a whole other barrier that we've not really touched on. But again, getting this right, not doing something that you are not trained to do, I think is really important. But if you can get somebody in to run a program like this, and your Senko or your head of pastoral care, if they're not the DSL, because the DSL will have a lot of other things on their plate, or a head of year, or somebody who is just interested in pastoral care and hasn't kind of moved up the job titles yet and wants an into pastoral care, get somebody in the school in there to learn how to deliver these techniques safely and in a way that is manageable, so that this can become sustainable practice in school. Also, co-delivery is sustainable for teachers, because delivering this, kind of like in the conversations that we've had about revision sessions, delivering this is asking teachers to do something else, to give up a lunchtime, to give up an after-school slot, to give up 50 minutes of their week, and that's just in the delivery without the preparation. So if you are co-teaching it, if you can get 2 of you on board to train with the EdPsych, or if it's initially the EdPsych and one other person and you take it in turns, that at least is going to reduce both the cognitive load for you and the workload for you. Number 5, timing matters more than we might think. The research is very clear. The start of the academic year is the right time to deliver exam anxiety support. Before exams are realistically on their mind is when we should be doing it. Students need that lead up time to practice those exercises. So if you're planning on running something like this, the conversation needs to happen in September or October, not in February. So if you are thinking of planning something like this, now might be the time that you start talking about it, that you start doing the research, you start contacting educational psychologists, whatever you need to do so that you can have a start time in September. Number 6, don't add to the load of what you're already asking your students to do. Just like you're giving up 50 minutes of your week to come and deliver this program, and then whatever time you are spending outside of the program preparing for it, you're asking the students to give up that same amount of time. The 50 minutes with you in the room learning their techniques, and then while you're prepping the next session, they will be practicing them. So don't then add on extra homework for them to do, because they won't do it. Or if they do, they will do it to the detriment of something else. Try and make sure that everything can be completed within your sessions. And number 7, I can't believe I managed to do it in 7. Rethink how you recruit this kind of support. I don't think that the study itself came up with a satisfactory answer to that concern, to how we target the pupils that we want to offer this support to. But the framing of the invitation is really important. Exam anxiety support shouldn't be presented as something that you need if you're struggling, because that framing creates a stigma barrier. And it creates a self-selection bias that means the students who could most benefit from it, but are least likely to admit that they need help, for example, your boys, based on the research that we looked at last week, are not likely to come. So it needs to be framed as developing exam strategies. It needs to sound like it's something that anybody could choose. It needs to be named and framed as something that anybody could feel comfortable saying yes to attending without feeling like it's a confession, without feeling like it's an admittance of weakness. Alternatively, this is something that could be developed and deployed in tutor time, in CPSHE lessons. If it's something that is delivered to everybody, you do lose that cohesive group feeling. You do lose that feeling of this is something that everybody in this room is going through, and so they get me, because not everybody in that room is going through it. But if you're perhaps worried about how you're going to frame the recruitment, or maybe if you want to try it out before you start specifically recruiting specific children, you could do it in a whole class context. And then that way, those who are going to benefit from it will benefit, even if they wouldn't necessarily come to a targeted intervention. And those who won't benefit from it, they don't lose anything. They will still be learning fairly decent techniques for coping with times that they feel stressed or anxious. I want to end with something that the researchers say toward the end of the paper, but that I think is worth putting front and center. They write that the nature of this program allowed participants to share their experiences in what they described as a safe, constructive, stigma-free environment. And students felt empowered to apply what they had learned, not just to exams, but to other areas of their life. And that's the thing that I've really taken from this paper. We may think that by implementing a program like this, we are just helping with exam anxiety, which we know is going to help with results because we are freeing up that cognitive load. But what we're actually doing is setting up these children who are anxious children with techniques that they may not be able to access elsewhere, but that they can take out into the rest of their lives and use to improve them. As teachers, we talk a lot about wanting to make a difference. And I think that that is one huge difference that we can absolutely make. I hope you have found today interesting. I hope you have found it useful, even if you're not planning on introducing an intervention like this. I hope that you have thought a lot about the anxiety that your students might be feeling, how your students might be feeling right now, and focused on that difference between worry and anxiety. I will be back same time, same place next Saturday morning. We will be looking at perfectionism and how we can help students who have those perfectionist tendencies, because that within itself is a whole cognitive load issue that we need to help them deal with ahead of exams. So I do hope that you will join me for that one. Until then, I hope that you all have a wonderful week. I hope that you have a great rest of the weekend, whether you are spending it marking or whether you are able to get out and take some mental health time for yourselves. And I will see you next Saturday morning. Thank you very much and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.